The first time my manager said my name that morning, it wasn't to praise my work, it was to entertain the room. For weeks before that meeting, Grant had been making little comments that sounded like jokes until you were the target. "Must be nice," he'd say when I left on time to pick up my kid. "Some of us earn our keep." He'd forward my client wins to senior leadership, then tell me in private that I was pricing myself out of the room. 2 directors had quietly left the company in the month before, and every time someone disappeared, Grant would clap his hands and call it streamlining. The message was always the same. If you cost more than he could control, he would make you the problem. I kept my head down because my accounts were stable and my numbers were clean. In a regulated business, clean numbers are currency. I assumed that would protect me. I was wrong. We were 10 minutes into our weekly team sync. Camera on for remote people, conference room packed for everyone else, when Grant slid a paper across the table like a prop. He didn't look at the agenda. He didn't look at the roadmap. He looked straight at me, smirked, and said, "Since we're all talking about value today, let's talk about what it costs to keep you." He lifted the sheet and read my pay out loud. 121,000. He dragged out each word, letting it hang there like a dirty secret. A couple of people laughed, nervous, reflexive, the kind of laugh you do when you don't know where to put your eyes. Someone on the video call froze, their little square going perfectly still. I felt my face heat, but my hands stayed flat on the table. Then Grant tilted his head like he was being reasonable. "Explain why you're worth that." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult him. I said one sentence, calm and factual. "My accounts brought in more renewals than anyone on this floor last quarter, and you approved my comp in writing." The room went quiet in a way that made my ears ring. Grant pushed his chair back and stood up. He walked behind me, slow, close enough that I could smell his coffee and whatever cologne he thought made him look like leadership. He leaned down toward my shoulder and hissed, "Don't correct me in front of them." I started to turn my head. I didn't even get a full breath. His hand snapped across my face. It wasn't a stumble. It wasn't an accident. It was sharp and clean, like he'd done it in his mind 100 times. My chair rocked. Someone gasped. A pen clattered to the floor, and before I could process the shock, the door to the conference room opened. HR, not rushing, not startled, just ready. Marisol from HR stood there with a clipboard, like she'd been waiting in the hallway for a cue. Behind her, the security supervisor, Dale, hovered with his badge reader in hand. Marisol's eyes flicked to my cheek, then to Grant, then back to me. "Everyone," she said, voice steady, "please return to your desks. We need the room." Grant's face shifted fast, anger to confusion to the smile he used on executives. "This is ridiculous," he said, already backing toward the door as if he'd been the one attacked. He got in my space. I was de-escalating. Marisol didn't argue. She didn't comfort me either. She pointed at a chair in the corner. "Please sit and we'll take statements." That was the moment I understood something I'd never wanted to understand. This wasn't a surprise to them. This was a procedure. I sat because my legs didn't trust me. My cheek pulsed, hot under my skin. Dale stood by the door, not looking at me, just watching Grant like he was tracking a risk level. Marisol opened a folder that already had a label on it, my department name, my manager's name, and a blank line where my name would go. "Can you tell me what happened?" she asked. I stared at the folder and heard my own voice come out calmer than I felt. He read my compensation out loud, then he told me to justify it. Then he hit me. Marisol's pen moved. No reaction, no, "Are you okay?" "Not yet." "And before that," she said, "was there any disagreement? Any raised voices?" Grant let out a laugh that sounded like a cough. "I was trying to coach him. He's been combative for weeks. He's difficult." I looked at Grant and realized he was already building the version of me he needed, so I built mine too. "I have the agenda," I said, "and the chat log. I can tell you exactly what I said, word for word. And there are witnesses, everyone in this room." Marisol nodded like that was a box to check. We'll speak with each witness individually. Dale cleared his throat. Grant, please step outside with me. Grant raised his hands in a performance of innocence. Fine, but I want it on record. I felt threatened. Dale guided him out. The door shut. For the first time in my career, I was alone in a room with HR, and the silence felt heavier than the hit. Marisol set her pen down and finally looked at my face like a person, not a case file. Do you need medical attention? I need you to tell me why you were already outside the door, I said, and my voice stayed level, only because my pride was holding it up. Marisol's eyes didn't blink. I'm not sure what you mean. I mean, you didn't walk in surprised, I said. You walked in on time. Her mouth tightened just for a second. Then it smoothed back into policy. We received a report of a disturbance. A disturbance, I repeated, and almost laughed. In a closed meeting that he was leading. She didn't answer that. Instead, she slid a form toward me. This is an incident statement. Write what happened in your own words. I picked up the paper. At the top, in small print, it said, Workplace Conduct Event. And underneath, pre-filled, was the timestamp of the meeting, which meant someone had reported it before his hand ever touched my face. My phone buzzed in my pocket, one notification, then another, then another. I pulled it out and saw what made my stomach drop. My access to the client dashboard, my own accounts, had been revoked while I was still sitting in the conference room. I looked up at Marisol. Someone's in my systems. Marisol's expression didn't change, but her hand paused over her clipboard. That may be temporary while we review. No, I said, and this time there was steel in it. That's retaliation, and it's happening right now. Outside the conference room, through the glass, I saw Grant in the hallway, talking to someone on his phone, smiling like he'd already won. And that was when I stopped thinking like an employee who hoped things would be fair. I started thinking like someone who needed proof before the story got rewritten. What happened after the hit wasn't the worst part. It was how quickly they tried to make it sound mutual. Marisol kept her voice soft, almost kind, the way people speak when they're trying to lower the temperature in a room that could burn a company down. I'm going to ask you a few questions, she said, and then we'll decide next steps. She didn't say he assaulted you. She didn't say you were harmed. She said incident, like it was weather. I stared at the access error on my phone again. The client dashboard I lived in, gone. The shared drive with renewal notes, gone. Even my calendar was lagging, loading slowly like it was being peeled away layer by layer. Marisol noticed where my eyes went. Your access may be temporarily restricted while we review, she said carefully. That's standard. It happened while I was still in the room, I said. That's not standard. That's someone pressing buttons in real time. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she slid the statement form closer. Write the sequence of events in your own words. I could feel my cheek throbbing, and the temptation to write like I felt, angry, humiliated, betrayed, was strong. But I'd been around long enough to know feelings don't survive investigations. Timelines do. So I wrote it like a report. I wrote that Grant displayed confidential compensation information in a team meeting. I wrote that he read my compensation aloud. I wrote that he demanded justification. I wrote my exact response, as close to verbatim as memory allowed. I wrote that he approached me, issued a verbal threat, and struck me with an open hand. I wrote that the meeting contained witnesses in person and remote. I wrote the names I could remember without checking my blocked directory. Marisol watched my pen move like she was watching a fuse burn. When I finished, she took the paper and scanned it without expression. Thank you, she said. Now I want to ask. Did you do anything that could be perceived as aggressive? Raise your voice? Stand up? Move toward him? There it was. The doorway. The part where the story turns into both sides. No, I said. I stayed seated. I spoke one sentence. You can confirm that with witnesses. And prior to today, she continued, Have there been conflicts between you two? I let out a breath through my nose, slow. He's been making comments about my pay for weeks. That's not conflict. That's pressure. And today he brought a printed document. That wasn't spontaneous. Marisol's pen hovered. Do you know how he obtained that document? That question landed in my gut, because it wasn't just about him being cruel. It was about a breach. I don't, I said, but I know it wasn't his to share. She nodded as if that was a separate file she could open later. Okay. Through the glass wall, I watched Dale escort Grant down the hall toward an empty office. Grant's body language was relaxed now. He wasn't shaken. He wasn't scared. He looked like a man who'd rehearsed a scene and hit his mark. Marisol followed my gaze. We will be speaking with him as well. Of course, I said. And while you do, I need 2 things documented. Marisol looked back at me. First, I said, I want the incident report number. The official one, not a verbal assurance. Second, I'm requesting preservation of evidence. Security footage of the hallway and conference room entrance. The meeting invitation, attendance list, and any chat logs from the remote platform. Badge access logs for my account changes. And any emails or documents used to obtain my compensation details. The word sounded formal even to me, but that was the point. Formal is harder to bury. Marisol's face tightened again, just slightly. We follow standard retention procedures. I'm not asking about standard, I said. I'm making a preservation request today. She held my eyes for a long moment, weighing the cost of pushing back. Then she wrote something at the top of her notes and said, Understood. A message popped up on my phone from a coworker, Leah. Are you okay? He's telling people you got in his face. My jaw clenched. Not because I was surprised, because I knew what that meant. Grant wasn't just building a defense. He was recruiting witnesses to feel a certain way about it. People don't remember facts under pressure. They remember who looked calm and who looked dangerous. I typed back with one hand. I'm okay. Please don't discuss details yet. If anyone asks, tell them to speak to HR. Then I opened my email and tried to pull the meeting invite, only to see an authentication error. My access was deteriorating in front of me like rust spreading. I can't access my email, I said, holding the phone up, and my client systems were cut during the incident. Marisol's tone stayed level, but it lost warmth. I'm going to contact IT. Please do it in writing, I said, and include the time the restriction was placed, because it matters. That got her attention again. Liability has a smell, and that sentence carried it. She stood and walked to the door, opened it a few inches, and spoke quietly to Dale. He nodded once and left. Marisol sat back down across from me. I'm also going to ask if you need medical attention. I do, I said, and I'm going to get it. But before I go anywhere, I want to understand something. What's that? You said you received a report of a disturbance, I said. Who reported it? Marisol's gaze didn't flinch, but her answer came slower. I can't share the identity of the reporting party. So you were contacted before the strike, I said, keeping my voice even, because you were outside the door at exactly the right moment. Marisol didn't confirm it. She didn't deny it. She simply said, we responded as quickly as possible. That non-answer told me enough. Grant had set the table. Either he warned HR that I was volatile, or he told them he was going to have a difficult conversation and wanted them close. In either way, he made sure the company's first instinct would be containment, not justice. And he didn't just want me humiliated. He wanted me isolated, locked out of my work so I couldn't prove my worth or protect my accounts. Dale returned with a small laminated card and set it on the table. Here's the case reference, he said. You'll get an email once IT restores limited access. Marisol looked at me. We're going to place you on paid administrative leave while we investigate. It's standard in situations like this. You'll be instructed not to contact team members about the incident. Paid leave, standard language, clean packaging. My cheek still burned, but something else was colder now, clarity. If I'm on leave, I said, Then my accounts need to be protected from any changes made to cover this up. I want it documented that I'm requesting no deletions or edits to my client notes, and I want an audit trail review of anything modified after this moment. Marisol stared at me, then wrote again. This time her pen moved faster. Okay, she said, and for the first time, the words sounded less like a script and more like a concession. I stood slowly, testing whether my balance was steady. I'm going to urgent care, I said, and I want written confirmation of the leave terms, the evidence preservation request, and the case reference number before the end of the day. Marisol nodded. You'll receive it. I walked out of the conference room with Dale beside me, past co-workers who pretended not to look, and a few who couldn't stop. Grant's office door was closed now, but I could hear his voice through the wall, laughing like the punchline had landed. In the lobby, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Leah. It was an automated notification from the company system. Your access has been updated. And underneath it, one more line that made my stomach turn. Manager approval. Granted. Grant wasn't just trying to survive this. He was still reaching for the story. That night, I stopped being the guy who waited for fairness. Urgent care smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. I sat under fluorescent lights while a nurse asked me to rate my pain on a scale I didn't trust. My cheekbone was swelling, the skin hot and tender. When I told her it happened at work, her tone changed, slower, more careful, because everyone knows what a paper trail can do. The physician didn't dramatize it. He checked my pupils, asked about dizziness, ran through concussion questions, and wrote down exactly what he saw. Redness, swelling, bruising consistent with a strike. He offered imaging if symptoms worsened. He printed the visit summary and told me to keep it. I drove home with that summary on the passenger seat, like it was evidence in a trial I hadn't agreed to join. When I walked in, my son looked up from the couch and said, "Dad, what happened to your face?" I told him I bumped into something. The lie tasted like metal. I went to the bathroom, turned on the light, and saw the mark clearly for the first time. An angry bloom under my eye. I took photos from 3 angles, with the date and time showing on my phone, then uploaded them to my personal storage. Not because I wanted drama, because I'd learned the hard way that companies forget faster than bruises fade. At home, my phone kept lighting up with blocked access alerts. Each one was sterile language. Permissions updated, role reassigned, group membership removed. But together they were a message. While I was documenting an assault, someone was erasing my footprint. I didn't call anyone. I didn't vent in a group chat. I opened my laptop, signed in through the employee portal, and watched the login wheel spin until it threw me out again. Limited access, just like Dale promised. Enough to receive HR's instructions, not enough to protect my work. So I documented that too. I screenshotted every access notification. I wrote down the exact times. I created a simple list. What I could access yesterday, what I couldn't access now. In a normal investigation, access changes happen after a decision. These were happening during the chaos, like someone was cleaning a scene. Marisol's email finally came through near midnight. Paid administrative leave. No contact with the team. Investigation ongoing. She attached the case reference and 2 paragraphs of polished neutrality that made my skin crawl. She didn't write, "Your manager hit you." She wrote, "An incident occurred." I stared at that phrase until I felt something inside me shift. If I let them name it, they would control it. So I started naming things myself. First, I wrote my own timeline while the details were still sharp. The exact moment he read my pay. The exact sentence I said, the angle of his hand, the way the room sounded when it went quiet. I listed everyone who was present and everyone who was remote. I wrote where each person sat because proximity matters when stories start changing. I even noted who laughed, not to punish them, but to remember the social pressure in that room. Then I looked at the original problem, the one he tried to turn into a joke. How did he get my compensation record? Compensation isn't public. In our company, it sat behind HR systems with role-based access and audit logging. Managers could see ranges. A few could see exact figures during annual planning. Most couldn't. We also had a policy, buried in the employee handbook, about handling confidential personnel information. It wasn't a law textbook, it was a corporate shield, and Grant had just swung it in public. I kept replaying the detail that bothered me most, the paper in his hand, printed, not a screenshot on his phone, not something he overheard. Printed means source. Printed means someone pulled a report, or someone forwarded a comp planning packet, or someone left a file open on a shared drive that shouldn't exist. None of that happens by accident without somebody being careless or somebody being intentional, and breaches live longer than bruises. I called an employment attorney the next morning. Not a dramatic call, a quiet one. I told her I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth to survive the process. She listened without interrupting, then asked 3 questions that cut through everything. Do you have medical documentation? Yes. Do you have witnesses? Yes. Do you have proof of retaliation? I had access logs changing in real time. Then she asked a 4th question that made my stomach drop. Do you have proof of how he accessed your compensation? I didn't. Not yet. Her advice was blunt. Don't resign. Don't meet alone with anyone without an agenda. Keep everything in writing. Ask for preservation of evidence again, formally, and make it clear you expect the company to prevent retaliation. She told me something else too. Companies can't control what employees discuss about pay, but they can, and often do, punish managers who weaponize confidential records. Focus on what you can prove, she said. Violence, procedure, retaliation, documentation. Before I sent anything, I reread Marisol's message like a contract. The language was careful, but it had one weakness. It implied the company was investigating in good faith. If they were, they should have no problem preserving evidence. So I wrote an email back that was impossible to misunderstand. I thanked her for the reference number. I confirmed I was seeking medical care and attaching the visit summary. I requested again that security footage, meeting attendance records, remote platform logs, and badge access logs be preserved. I asked for the audit trail on my account permissions, who initiated the changes, when, and under what authorization. I requested that my client notes and renewal documents be placed under a legal hold, so nothing could be deleted by routine cleanup. And then I added the line I didn't want to write, but needed to. Please also confirm in writing how my confidential compensation information was accessed and why it was disclosed in a team meeting. I hit send. For a few hours there was silence, the kind that means something's gone wrong. Then my phone rang from a block number. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, Marisol emailed again. Shorter this time, colder. We have scheduled a follow-up meeting to discuss next steps. No agenda, no details. Just a calendar invite, and under required attendees, I saw his name. Grant. I stared at the invite until my hands stopped shaking. They wanted me in a room with him so they could smooth it over, split blame, and move on. They wanted a clean ending, but I wasn't looking for clean. I forwarded the invite to my attorney, took a breath, and replied to HR with one sentence. I will attend. Please confirm that legal and security will be present, and that the meeting will be documented. Because if they wanted a room, I was going to make sure it had witnesses. When I saw Grant's name on the invite, my first instinct was to cancel. Not because I was scared of him, because I knew what that meeting was designed to do. Turn a clean violation into a messy misunderstanding. Spread the blame until nobody was responsible, then send everyone back to work like nothing happened. I didn't cancel. I replied with one line asking for legal, security, and documentation. Then I showed up early, dressed like it was a board presentation, not the aftermath of an assault. The conference room they chose wasn't the one from the incident. Smaller, windowless, no glass walls, no audience. Marisol was there, a different HR woman I hadn't met, employee relations, and Dale from security. There was also a man from legal who introduced himself with a first name only, like names were liabilities. Grant wasn't there yet. Marisol started the way I expected. We're here to discuss next steps and ensure a safe workplace for everyone. For everyone, I repeated, and kept my voice flat. The legal rep nodded politely. We want to understand what happened and resolve this appropriately. I slid a folder onto the table. Printed timeline, medical visit summary, photos, screenshots of access changes with timestamps, a list of witnesses, the case reference, my preservation request. Nobody touched it at first. They just looked at the folder like it was heavier than paper. Marisol asked, "Before we begin, do you feel safe participating in this meeting?" "I'll feel safe when you stop trying to put me in a room with him," I said. "You invited him." Employee relations kept her tone soft. He requested to attend. "So did I request to be hit?" I said. "Or did that just happen too?" That was the first crack. The legal rep shifted in his chair. Dale's jaw tightened like he'd heard enough hallway stories to know where this was going. "And just to be clear," I continued, "my access was cut while I was sitting with HR. That's not a cooling-off measure. That's retaliation." Marisol opened her mouth, but the door clicked before she could speak. Grant walked in like he owned the air. Clean shirt, calm face. The confident half-smile he wore when he thought he'd already managed the outcome. He didn't look at my cheek. He looked at the legal rep. "Thanks for making time," he said, then finally glanced at me like I was the inconvenience. "I'm sorry things got dramatic." I didn't answer. I just watched HR. I wanted to see if anyone would stop him. No one did. Marisol said, "Grant, please take a seat." Grant sat, leaned back, and folded his hands. "This is being blown out of proportion," he said. He stepped up to me. I put my hand up. It was self-defense. I turned to Dale. "You reviewed the footage?" Dale didn't look at Grant. "Not yet." "Why not?" I asked. The legal rep cut in smoothly. "We're in the process of reviewing all relevant materials." I nodded once. "Good. Because the meeting platform logs will show I never stood up. And the room camera, if you preserve it, will show he approached me." Grant scoffed. "You were disrespectful." "I said one sentence," I replied, "and you can confirm the exact sentence with witnesses." Employee relations lifted a hand. "Let's focus on de-escalation. We want to move forward professionally." That word again, move forward. The corporate way of saying, let's skip the part where accountability happens. So I didn't let them. "I'm going to read my timeline," I said and opened the folder. "I'll keep it short." Grant's smile tightened. Marisol's eyes dropped to her notes. I read it, clean and clinical. What he disclosed, what he said, what I said, what he did. When HR entered, when my access changed. No adjectives, no feelings, just sequence. When I finished, I slid the photos across to legal and asked, "Do you want the medical record now, or after you tell me why my confidential compensation was printed and read out loud?" Grant's posture shifted, just a fraction, like a mask slipping. He laughed once. "It wasn't confidential. Managers have access." "Managers have access during planning," I said. "They don't have the right to weaponize it in a team meeting." Marisol finally spoke. "The company does not condone sharing confidential information." "Then explain the printout," I said. "Explain the paper. Explain the timing." Grant looked at Marisol like he expected her to pull him out of it. She didn't. Her eyes stayed on her notes. The legal rep asked carefully, "Grant, how did you obtain the document you referenced in the meeting?" Grant shrugged. "It was in the planning packet." "Which packet?" legal asked. "The comp planning packet," Grant said a little too fast. "We all got it." Employee relations shook her head slightly. "That packet isn't distributed to all people managers." Grant's face hardened. "Then someone sent it to me." "Who?" legal asked again. Grant's eyes flicked to Marisol and back. "I don't remember." And right then Dale's phone buzzed. He checked it, then looked up. "I just got confirmation from IT," he said. The access changes to his accounts were initiated under Grant's manager credentials, time-stamped during the incident window. The room went quiet. Grant sat forward. That's not possible. I was in a meeting. You were, I said, with my salary in your hand. Grant pointed at me. He's setting me up. I didn't flinch. Then you should be thrilled there are logs. The legal rep's voice changed. Still calm, but colder. Grant, did you direct any access changes during or immediately after the incident? Grant looked at Marisol again, then at employee relations, like he was searching for an off-ramp. I requested limited access, he said, for safety. For whose safety? I asked. Mine or yours? Employee relations leaned in. Grant, did you instruct anyone on your team to restrict his access? Grant's jaw worked. I told my lead to secure the accounts. He's volatile. There it was. The setup. The story he'd planted. I didn't argue with the word. I put it next to the facts. I asked for evidence preservation, I said, looking at legal. I asked for the case number. I went to urgent care. I didn't contact the team. I didn't threaten anyone. And yet my access was pulled while I was still reporting the assault. Marisol finally lifted her eyes to Grant. Did you report a disturbance before the meeting escalated? Grant blinked. Dale cut in, quiet but firm. HR was positioned outside the room before any physical contact occurred. That's confirmed by badge time stamps in the hallway. Grant's mouth opened, then closed. His confidence drained in real time, replaced by irritation, because the room was no longer his audience. The legal rep pushed his chair back slightly. Grant, I'm going to ask you to step out with security. Grant stood abruptly. Are you kidding me? He's the one. Now, Dale said, and it wasn't a request. Grant turned to Marisol, eyes wide, like he couldn't believe HR wasn't saving him. Marisol didn't move. Employee relations didn't move. Legal didn't move. Grant left. The door shut. The air felt lighter and uglier at the same time. Marisol exhaled and looked at me. For the first time, she didn't sound like a script. You will not be required to be in the same room as him again, she said. I nodded once. Good. Legal tapped the folder. We're placing him on leave pending investigation, he said. We're also initiating a review into the compensation document access and the system changes. I stared at him. And my accounts? Dale answered. They're being frozen. Any changes made since the incident will be audited. That was the first moment in days where my chest loosened. Then employee relations added quietly, There's one more thing. I looked up. She slid a new paper across the table. We pulled the print audit, she said. The compensation report was exported and printed from a shared HR terminal the morning of the meeting. I didn't speak. I just felt the shape of it clicking into place. Grant hadn't only crossed a line, he'd dragged someone else into it, and whoever helped him, on purpose or by pressure, was about to realize this wasn't a joke anymore. The moment employee relations slid that print audit page across the table, I understood why HR had been outside the door. It wasn't instinct. It was choreography. Someone had told them to be there before anything happened, because someone wanted the company's first record of the day to be, we anticipated a disturbance, not. A manager assaulted an employee. Marisol's eyes stayed on the paper for a beat too long. Then she looked at me and said quietly, We're going to handle this through the process. The process, I repeated. Legal folded his hands. Your access will be restored today. You'll remain on paid leave while we complete the investigation. We'll contact you for a formal recorded statement. I didn't argue. I'd learned that arguing is what people do when they don't have leverage. I'll provide a recorded statement, I said. But I want 3 things confirmed in writing. 1. Evidence preservation. 2. No retaliation. 3. My client accounts remain frozen until audit review is complete. Legal nodded once. Agreed, Dale added. And for your safety, we're issuing a no-contact directive. I didn't feel relieved yet. Directives are easy. Follow-through is what counts. I walked out of that building with the same calm I'd forced myself to wear since the meeting. But when I got to my car, my hands shook so hard, I had to sit there with the engine off and breathe until it passed. It wasn't fear of Grant. It was the delayed shock of realizing how close I'd been to losing everything. Not because I was wrong, but because I was convenient. The next week moved in a strange rhythm. Slow days, sharp moments. Legal interviewed me by phone with a court reporter on the line. I told the story again, the same way, with the same sequence. I refused to guess at things I couldn't prove. I refused to exaggerate. I didn't call Grant a monster. I called him a manager who disclosed confidential compensation information, issued a verbal threat, then struck me in a workplace meeting. I gave names. I gave timestamps. I gave facts. When they asked about my pay being read out loud, Legal paused. To confirm, he said, you did not authorize disclosure of that information. No, I said, and it was used to humiliate me, not to discuss comp planning. Employee Relations asked, did you ever discuss compensation with your coworkers? I've discussed my right to negotiate, I said. I've never handed someone a printed report of another employee's exact figure. Silence on the line. The kind that means they know the difference. They spoke to witnesses next. I could tell because my phone started lighting up with messages from coworkers who didn't know what to say. Leah texted, he told us you lunged. That's not what I saw. You didn't even stand up. Another coworker, James, wrote, HR asked me if you were aggressive. I told them the only aggressive person in that room was him. Then came the message that hit hardest because it was so small and so human. A junior analyst I barely knew emailed, I'm sorry I laughed. I didn't understand what he was doing. I won't forget it. I didn't respond. Not because I was punishing them, because I knew how investigations twist contact into coordination. I let the paper trail speak for me. On the fourth day, my access came back, fully, not limited. It confirmed in writing that the changes had been initiated under Grant's manager credentials during the incident window and then adjusted multiple times over the next 2 hours. That wording was careful, but it was enough. It established that what happened wasn't an automatic safety protocol. It was a human decision. On the fifth day, Legal called again. Security has reviewed footage, the rep said. It confirms you remained seated when the physical contact occurred. I closed my eyes and let that sentence sink in, not because I needed vindication, because I needed protection from the story he'd been building. And the compensation document? I asked. A pause. We confirmed the report was printed from an HR terminal, he said. We are investigating access and authorization. That meant someone in HR, or someone with access to HR space, had pulled it. Whether they were pressured, careless, or complicit, I couldn't tell yet. But it was real, and it was traceable. 2 days later, Marisol sent an email that was the first honest thing I'd received since the incident. Grant has been placed on investigatory leave, it said. You will no longer report to him, effective immediately. Not pending, not possibly, immediately. And then, for the first time, she wrote a sentence without wrapping it in corporate cotton. We understand you experienced harm at work, and we take that seriously. I read it 3 times. It wasn't an apology, but it was a shift. It was the company realizing the file was no longer containable. The following week, they brought me in, not to meet Grant, but to meet the division head and legal. They sat me in a neutral room with a glass of water and a box of tissues that felt like an insult. The division head, a man who'd never remembered my name before, looked tired. I want to start by saying, this should never have happened, he said. I watched his eyes. He wasn't saying it because he cared about me. He was saying it because the company had finally seen what it looked like from the outside. Legal slid a document across the table. This outlines the company's corrective actions, he said. Corrective actions, not justice, not accountability, corporate language, but the substance mattered. Grant was terminated for cause, workplace violence, misuse of confidential personnel information, and policy violations related to access control. Security had documented the incident as a confirmed assault. They weren't calling it a disturbance anymore. The no-contact directive became permanent. My reporting line changed, effective that day. My accounts were returned to me, and a separate audit team reviewed every modification made during the access window. They restored notes that had been altered and pulled logs showing what changed, when, and by whom. I asked the question I'd been holding back. "And the HR terminal?" I said. The division head exhaled. "An HR coordinator printed it," he admitted. "Grant requested it. He represented it as necessary for planning. That was not appropriate. That employee has been disciplined, and HR access controls are being updated." Disciplined, not fired. That told me something else, too. They believed pressure was involved, or they believed the employee was expendable in a different way. Either way, the gap in their system had a name now. It wasn't mystery. It was policy failure and someone abusing authority. Legal cleared his throat. "Oh, we're also covering your medical costs related to the incident, and you'll receive additional compensation as part of resolution." He didn't say the number out loud. He didn't have to. The terms were on paper, clean and formal. With a non-retaliation clause and a confidentiality agreement the company needed more than I did. It wasn't a movie ending. It was the kind of ending that happens when a company sees real exposure and chooses containment with concessions. I read every line, slowly, like my job depended on it, because it did. When I finished, I looked up. "I'm not signing anything that prevents me from reporting workplace violence to law enforcement if I choose." Legal nodded carefully. "Understood. Nothing in the agreement limits your legal rights." That was the moment I believed them. Not because they were good, because they were boxed in by their own paperwork. I went back to work the next Monday. New manager, new floor, same building, but it felt different, like the walls had learned what voices sound like when they're recorded. People avoided my eyes for the first hour. Then Leah stopped by my desk and set down a coffee without a word. James gave me a tight nod. The junior analyst didn't say anything, but she didn't laugh at anyone's jokes that day either. At lunch, my new manager asked if I wanted to talk about it. "No," I said. "I want to work, and I want the work to be normal again." He nodded, and he didn't push. That, more than any HR memo, felt like respect. 3 weeks later, I saw Grant's name pop up in external industry newsletter. Not a promotion, not a new role. A short line about a manager departing following an internal conduct investigation. No details, no drama. Just a quiet obituary for a career that relied on people staying silent. I stared at that line for a long time, then closed the email and went back to my spreadsheet. Because the truth is, the best revenge wasn't watching him fall. It was realizing he couldn't make me small with a number again. He read my pay out loud to own the room. In the end, the only number that mattered was the one he didn't control. How many witnesses remembered exactly what he did?